I have an Alex Murdaugh on the line, caller from 4147 Moselle Road. He's advising that his wife and child was shot.
My boy over there, I could see it was.
Who stands out in your mind that would want to come after Paul and or Maggie?
I mean, sir, I can't think of anybody who would want to go to that extreme.
So does that mean that I am a suspect?
You were still in, like I told Corey earlier, you were still in this.
I admit again that I've lied to people that trusted me.
Oh, what tangle, web, we weave. What did you mean by that?
It meant when I lied, I continue to lie.
The question is, when will it end?
Alex Murdaugh is now a convicted killer, sentenced to serve at least 2 life sentences for the murders of his wife Maggie and son Paul. But with open investigations linked to the Murdaugh family, many are echoing the same question we heard from the judge assigned to all Murdaugh's criminal cases. When will it end? Thanks for joining us. I'm Dawn Baker.
And I'm Max Dieknight. WTOC is taking a deep dive into the case that's captured the nation's attention over these past 2 years.
It all started late at night on June 7th, 2021, with shots fired at the Murdaugh family's Charleston County property and a 911 call dialed by the killer.
This is Alex Murdaugh at 4147 Moselle Road. I need the police to answer immediately. My wife and child shot badly.
That frantic 911 call kicked off a firestorm of headlines, questions, and scrutiny around Alex Murdaugh. But the Murdaugh family started making local headlines years before that tragic night. In July 2015, Buster Murdaugh's classmate, 19-year-old Stephen Smith, was found dead on a rural Hampton County road. SLED reopened the investigation into his death based on information they found while investigating Maggie and Paul's murders at the family's Colleton County property, known as Moselle. 3 years later, longtime Murdaugh family housekeeper, 57-year-old Gloria Satterfield, died following a trip-and-fall accident at Moselle. Alec later agreed to pay her sons more than $4 million he had pocketed himself from a wrongful death lawsuit. In February 2019, another tragedy leading to criminal charges against Paul Murdaugh. Authorities say the younger Murdaugh brother drunkenly crashed his father's boat into a bridge near Paris Island, killing 19-year-old Mallory Beach. 911 tapes from that night shed light on the horrific wreck.
911, where's your emergency?
We're in a boat crash on Arthur Street.
Okay.
We have someone missing.
The Beach family later sued the Murdaughs for their daughter's wrongful death, putting more financial pressure on Alec. Fast forward to June 6, 2021, Murdaugh's law office confronted him over hundreds of thousands of dollars missing. He later admitted to stealing from clients to help feed an opioid addiction. It all led up to the next night, June 7th, 2021. Murdaugh called 911 at 10:07 p.m., telling police he'd discovered his wife and son's bodies at the family's dog kennels. In an interview with detectives that night, Murdaugh gave his alibi, saying he was gone visiting his sick elderly parents miles away and that he hadn't been to the kennels at all that night. It was a lie. Videos from Paul Murdaugh's phone played in court put him at the scene of the crime minutes before his wife and son's phones shut off for good. In September 2021, while the murders of his wife and son were still being investigated, Murdaugh was pushed out of his family's law firm for misusing millions of dollars. A day later, he paid 61-year-old Curtis Smith to shoot him in the head in a suicide-for-hire plot. Murdaugh later admitted it, saying he did it so his surviving son Buster could get his $10 million life insurance policy. The next month, police arrested Murdaugh at a drug rehab center in Orlando for stealing from the Satterfields and was denied bond. Charges piled on in the months following. More than a year after the murders, on July 14, 2022, a Colleton County grand jury indicted Murdaugh on 2 counts of murder for killing his wife, 52-year-old Maggie Murdaugh, and son, 22-year-old Paul Murdaugh.
Those are just some of the elements entered into evidence during this trial that spell out the case investigators had mostly kept secret until then. They presented a mountain of information. Our Tyler Mannion was in the courtroom every single day. He breaks down the arguments that ultimately led to a conviction.
29 days of court, more than 70 witnesses, and over 800 exhibits entered into evidence made up what some are calling the trial of the century. WTOC was in the courtroom for all of it, and we want to spend a few minutes digging into the testimony that led the jury to convict Murdaugh of murder. Blazer over handcuffs, Alex Murdaugh was walked into the courthouse as a defendant where he and his family prosecuted cases, day after day after day.
The defendant over there, Alex Murdaugh, took a 12-shade shotgun and shot him in the shoulder.
To find Alex Murdaugh guilty of murdering his son, you're going to have to accept that he executes him in a brutal fashion.
The state jumped right into the night of the murders with body cam video and a law enforcement interview, both with mirrored emotion at the defense table. Clear from the beginning as a circumstantial case, instead of a smoking gun, the prosecution built their argument around a video that smoked out Alex's alibi.
You recognize Alex's voice?
Yes, sir.
100%?
Yes, sir.
Rogan Gibson was one of many witnesses to identify Alex's voice at the scene of the crimes just minutes before they were committed, a time Alex says he wasn't there. After that, Judge Clifton Newman ruled that evidence of financial crime charges would be allowed in this double murder trial, and the prosecution called several former colleagues of Alex to the stand, who were not pleased with him stealing client and firm money.
Did you really know Alex Murdaugh?
I don't think I ever really knew him. I don't think anybody knows him.
I said, oh, no, we're not.
At any time, did he ever pay you 1 penny?
No.
Financial crime testimony continued to spark heated moments.
I would move for mistrial.
At one point, the defense making that drastic objection after the prosecution asked if Maggie was concerned about family finances. Judge Newman denied that mistrial request, and the trial continued with emotional testimony.
I just couldn't believe it. I didn't think it was true.
From there, the state turned to the third law enforcement interview with Alec from August of 2021.
Did you kill Maggie?
No. Did I kill my wife?
Yes, sir.
No, David.
Judge Newman then allowed evidence from Murdaugh's suicide for hire plot into the trial.
I turned my head and, boom.
Before resting their case, the prosecution ran through a composite forensic timeline.
Do both Maggie and Paul's phone lock forever around 8:49?
They do.
And then the defense made another attempt to take this verdict out of this jury's hands.
Alex Murdaugh was not at the scene of the crime at the time his wife and son were murdered, and there's no evidence that he was. And for that reason, we move for a directed verdict.
Judge Newman overruled that motion swiftly as well, forcing the defense to make their case, starting with Alex's only remaining son.
Then he, sounded odd, and then he told me that my mom and brother had been shot. I kind of just sat there for a minute. I was in shock.
Buster was one of the most anticipated witnesses of the trial, but interest in his testimony paled in comparison to that of his father, who was on the stand for almost 2 full days.
You take this gun or any gun like it and shoot your son Paul in the chest in the feed room at your property off Moselle Road?
No, I did not. And Mr. Waters, just to try to get through this quicker, I admit.
I know you want to get through it quicker, but we're not. So answer the question, please.
What I admit is that I misled them, I did wrong, and that I stole their money.
And all those reasons that you just gave this jury about the most important part of your testimony was a lie too. Isn't that true, Mr. Murdaugh?
I disagree with that.
Nothing further.
The defense didn't want to close their case with Alec, though, calling his youngest brother John Marvin as their final witness to reinforce the image of a loving Murdaugh family.
Excuse me, I'm going to have a hard time talking about Paul because we had a very special relationship.
Then, closing arguments.
And you fooled Maggie and Paul, too. And they paid for it with their lives. Don't let him fool you, too.
On behalf of Buster, on behalf of Maggie, and on behalf of my friend Paul, I respectfully request that you do not compound a family tragedy with another.
Thank you.
The jury deliberated for less time than the state's closing argument took, coming to their decision in just 3 hours.
Guilty verdict.
Judge Newman wasting no time either, sentencing Alec to 2 consecutive life sentences the following morning.
You can convince yourself about it, but obviously you have the inability to convince anyone else about that.
Those are some of the biggest moments that drew national attention to this trial, leading some to describe the fascination that came with it as a circus. But if it was, the high-flying acts weren't limited to what we heard on the stand. Throughout this trial, we saw the Murdaugh family be moved around the courtroom for misconduct. Prosecution witnesses and attorneys met with cheers upon arrival and even a bomb threat that derailed an entire day of court. Through all of that, the focus trying to remain on 2 people brutally murdered back in June of 2021.
WTOC will have more on how Maggie and Paul were spoken of from the witness stand when After the Verdict continues. Not credible. That's what Judge Clifton Newman called Alex Murdaugh's testimony from the stand. Murdaugh admitting that he lied to investigators about where he was the night of the murders.
We heard a lot at trial about the web of lies surrounding Murdaugh's alibi, but we also heard something else from witnesses on the stand. Those who know the family expressed their love for the couple's youngest son, Paul.
We also heard the description of a loving mother, a Carolina Gamecock fan, and a beloved sister. The victims of this violent crime caught in what prosecutors called a complicated situation.
Maggie was a very special person, wasn't she?
She was. Maggie was sweet. She was kind of a free spirit. She was always up for anything that was going on.
She was just easygoing.
She was real involved with the boys' schools, you know, all their sporting events. I don't think she probably ever missed one.
Her main comment to me always was no worries.
We used to laugh that she'd get in the deer stand with her Southern Living magazine, and the boys would tell her she was making too much noise turning the pages.
But she really liked being at Edisto, and they had a lot of work that was going on, and she was trying to make sure everything was ready.
And she loved going out on the boat. She loved being at the beach. She loved going to the islands. She was a big Gamecock fan.
Are you a Gamecock fan?
I'm a big Clemson fan. She loved her family. She loved her boys. She just, you know, loved catching up on all the latest makeup and, you know, hair trends and shoes, and she just loved doing girl stuff with us.
Coming up, WTOC sits down with a legal expert to weigh in on the outcome of this historic case. The Alex Murdaugh double murder trial took 6 full weeks from start to finish, but this jury took about 3 hours to come up with a unanimous guilty verdict. That quick turnaround troubled at least one prominent Lowcountry defense attorney. I made the trip up to Charleston to sit down with Chris Adams. He's the former president of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Here's what he had to say about the outcome.
Right off the top, I asked Adams the question that Alex Murdaugh's fate hinged on.
Do you believe the prosecution did enough to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Alex Murdaugh was guilty of killing his wife and son?
In my personal judgment, there were still open questions that could have still had the possibility of there being a gunman other.
The Alex Murdaugh double murder trial took 6 full The Alex Murdaugh double murder trial took 6 full weeks from start to finish, but this jury took about 3 hours to come up with a unanimous guilty verdict. That quick turnaround troubled at least one prominent Lowcountry defense attorney. I made the trip up to Charleston to sit down with Chris Adams. He's the former president of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Here's what he had to say about the outcome.
Right off the top, I asked Adams the question that Alex Murdaugh's fate hinged on.
Do you believe the prosecution did enough to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Alex Murdaugh was guilty of killing his wife and son?
In my personal judgment, there were still open questions that could have still had the possibility of there being a gunman other than Alex Murdaugh beyond a reasonable doubt.
Adams argues the amount of time the jury took should give everyone pause.
When you have the amount of evidence to wrestle with that demanded apparently a 5-hour closing argument by the prosecution and there was less time to deliberate, that's highly unusual.
Still, he admits Paul Murdaugh's video at the family's kennels from that night was damning and forced the defense to play catch-up.
I think it was a smoking gun because he had denied that he'd been down there. And then that never is the burden of proof supposed to shift to the defense, but human nature is, well, he lied, and so why would someone lie? They would either lie to commit a murder or they would lie for another reason.
Adams also insists Murdaugh's decision to testify was a mistake.
Human nature is when a defendant testifies, the jurors decide, do we think they're being truthful or not? And that's a different question than, has the state proven him guilty beyond all reasonable doubt? And there's just going to be a lot of lies that he was going to have to own. And it would just make him very hard, I think, to be a credible witness.
Still, Adams says he feels this trial got off track and focused too much on Murdaugh's financial crimes, putting the defense in a difficult position.
You're supposed to be on trial for the crime you're charged with committing. So I was a little surprised at the scope and the amount of financial evidence that came in. And then also at the end of many of the financial witnesses, the final question, the coup de grace from the prosecutor was, well, now that you know all this, you've known Alex Murdaugh for 20 years, and now you know he was stealing from you or from the law firm or from the clients. What's your opinion of him now? And they go like, I don't trust him anymore. And that's all character.
Adams says while appeals are hard to win, he thinks Murdaugh's team has a case for a new trial.
We'll see. Not many people win on appeal, but you can't win if you don't file the briefs and go make the argument.
Well, some of the key players in this case were obvious to onlookers. Like we mentioned earlier this evening, the prosecutors were at times welcomed to court by cheers from the public. The defense, well-known attorneys in South Carolina, one of them even a state senator. But the demeanor that drew all of us in the morning that Alex Murdaugh was sentenced to life in prison was that of Judge Clifton Newman.
As I sit here in this courtroom and look around and reflect on the fact that over the past century, your family, including you, have been prosecuting people here in this courtroom, and many have received the death penalty, probably for lesser conduct.
The moment coming 23 years after Judge Clifton Newman was first elected to the bench by the South Carolina General Assembly. But before his career was spotlighted on the national stage, Judge Newman's path to the bench charts back to a role he played on a high school stage in Greeleyville, South Carolina. While Newman headed off to Cleveland, Ohio to study law, the Murdaugh family was in the thick of their nearly 90-year dynasty as top prosecutors in the state's 14th Circuit. Alex's grandfather held the job at the time. He took over the position from his father in 1940. Alex's father would become the third one in the family to hold the job when he took over in 1987, holding that office until 2006. Alec worked as a part-time prosecutor in the solicitor's office when his dad ran it. It's a legacy that couldn't be forgotten.
A person from a respected family who has controlled justice in this community for over a century. A person whose grandfather's portrait hang at the back of the courthouse that I had to have ordered removed in order to ensure that a fair trial was had by both the state and the defense.
Coming up, we take a look at the open investigations, some of them already resulting in additional charges, when After the Verdict continues. Alex Murdaugh will spend the rest of his life in prison for murdering his wife and son, but his legal troubles don't end there.
Murdaugh faces at least 99 other charges related to his alleged financial crimes. All of them will also be overseen by Judge Clifton Newman.
And I'm also assigned to preside over 99 others, at least 99 other cases.
The 54-year-old disbarred attorney is still charged with 99 counts of embezzlement, computer crimes, money laundering, conspiracy, and more for what prosecutors say was a wide-ranging scheme to cheat his law firm clients and others out of more than $9 million. Murdaugh also faces several charges from that 2021 botched suicide-for-hire plot in which he admitted to paying Curtis Smith to shoot him so his surviving son, Buster Murdaugh, could collect on his life insurance policy. Finally, Murdaugh's attorneys say they plan to appeal his murder conviction, with attorney Dick Harpootlian saying they will take this case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court if they have to. Their main argument, that the judge allowed too much time and evidence over Murdaugh's financial crimes into the trial, which they say tainted the jury.
We were hoping to get a jury to put all, that could ignore the noise, focus on the murder, and we ended up trying a case that they could have watched on Netflix.
WTOC will continue to bring you the updates as all of these cases move forward.
Everything we know about them at this point can be found in a dedicated tab on WTOC.com. Just look for the Murdaugh case under News. We're also putting this 30-minute special online as well as on our streaming platforms. Look for the Murdaugh Murders After the Verdict on WTOC Plus, available on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV.